Hello, Justice Sachs. Thank you for your visit to Armenia, and today I would like to ask you several questions concerning soft vengeance. First of all, can you please explain in some details what is soft vengeance, the term you coined?
Many people are startled at the idea of soft vengeance. Vengeance is hard and bitter and hitting back, and soft seems to be the exact opposite. And yet in my life, that's not the way it's been. And it goes back to I'm lying in my hospital bed in London. I've been blown up in Mozambique, where I was exiled from South Africa. I was teaching at the law school, helping the Ministry of Justice, and one day, I'm on my way to the beach and terrible darkness, and I hear a voice saying, "Albie, this is Ivo Garrido. You're in Maputo Central Hospital. Your arm is in lamentable condition. You must face the future with justice." And I was saying to the darkness, "What happened?" And a woman's voice said, "It was a car bomb." And I faint into delirium, but with a sense of joy. I know I'm safe, that South African security they've tried to kill me. They're not kidnapping me. I'm in safe hands. And that moment every freedom fighter is waiting for, will they come for me? Will they come today? Will I be brave? They'd come for me, they'd try to kill me, and I had survived. So a few weeks later, I'm lying in a hospital bed. I've been flown to London. I'm under an assumed name in case the security agents try to use poison to finish me off. And I get a letter. I love telling people, remember those things where you used to lick the envelopes, lick the stamps? This is a letter. I open it, and it says, "Don't worry, Comrade Albie, we will avenge you." Signed, Comrade Bobby. And I think, avenge me? You're going to cut off the arms? Avenge me? You're going to cut off the arms? You're going to blind in one eye all the people who've done these things? Is this the country we're fighting for? If we get freedom, if we get democracy, if we get justice, that will be my soft vengeance. Roses and lilies will grow out of my arm. And that phrase, soft vengeance, kept coming back into my head. So when I wrote a book on the experience of what it's like to wake up one day without an arm, I called it the soft vengeance of a freedom fighter. And it was remarkable. I was able to go back after 24 years of exile to my country. Soft vengeance. I was able to help write our country's constitution. How many lawyers get the chance to help write their country's constitution? Soft vengeance. I was able to vote as an equal for the first time. For the first time, 20 million South Africans, black, white, brown, voting as equals for the first time. That was soft vengeance. It was so powerful. It was so overwhelming. It was so meaningful. And it made sense to my losing the arm. It wasn't for nothing. And it wasn't as though the people who did this were unaffected, because our ideals were triumphing. And for our ideals of justice and humanity to triumph, that was much more powerful than sending a few rascals to jail. And the soft vengeance didn't even end there. I'm elevated, we say, by Nelson Mandela to the country's first constitutional court, guarding the very principles for which we'd been fighting. Soft vengeance. Because now the people who used to govern by killing and dividing and hate are subject to the law of equality and freedom and neighborliness. Ubuntu, we call it. Human interdependence now becomes foundational to our new vision. And the soft vengeance doesn't even end there, because we choose the site of a horrible, terrible former prison where both Gandhi and Mandela and other great leaders of ours, Robert Sobukwe and Chief Albert Luthuli and Fatima Mir, and so many names I can give, Barbara Hogan, locked up in that prison. That's where we built our new Constitutional Court. And it's a beautiful building with wonderful art, contemporary art, with natural passive cooling and heating and a feeling of environment. And you see the people moving outside, and the people outside can see into the building. And the theme of justice under a tree, the traditional African way of resolving disputes in modern conditions now being elevated, that is soft vengeance. It's so much more powerful than hard vengeance. Hard vengeance means you become like them, only you are stronger. Soft vengeance means the world you're living in is governed increasingly by the new values for which you were fighting, for which you lost the arm, went to prison, whatever it might be. That's very, very powerful, very beautiful. The last time I looked, I didn't see any roses and lilies growing out of my arm. But in a poetic, metaphorical sense, the roses and lilies are growing out of the arms of all our people who feel more free today, their dignity more respected, and who accept that there are new rules in terms of accountability of government, integrity, honesty, to the extent that that theme permeates our public life. The soft vengeance then increasingly becomes accepted as the new normality of a democratic, decent society.
Thank you. Now, coming to Armenian case, I wanted to tell a little bit about our recent developments. And in 2018, we have a non-violent revolution, and new government came to power, and until now, we are ruling the country, and we had many problems during all this year, COVID-19, and afterward war, and other horrible things happening. And from the beginning, when government came to power, they were talking about transitional justice, about vetting system, and other things. So, to put into force, and until now, 4 years later, we are still trying to do some reforms with justice reform and etc. And I was wondering, given the historical background, but since 1991 and mainly since beginning from 2000s, we had many cases of corruption, many cases of human rights violations and etc. And the current government was talking about trying to bring justice now, and I was wondering how soft vengeance can be helpful in this situation. Is it better to go and try to punish everyone, or there should be another way?
Well, in South Africa, we had that whole history of apartheid, which in itself was cruel and inhuman, and even within apartheid, terrible violence, torture, assassination, disappearances, forcible removals of people, and there was no way we could deal with all those issues through the courts. It was just too huge, and it would have occupied all our resources and all our energies to find the people, and where would we even get the evidence, because they would stand by each other. So we decided to use a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and interestingly enough, our TRC, as we called it, emerged because of problems we'd had inside the liberation movement, where we had tortured captives, and we took a decision internally that that was incompatible with the kind of country that we wanted in South Africa. And when one day we have had elections and we have a new government, then we must have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission in which we acknowledge our violations from the days of the struggle. The second aspect came in when the generals from the old regime were saying they'd been promised amnesty by President de Klerk, and there was nothing in the Constitution about amnesty. And I was actually one of the persons who recommended then that we use the idea of a Truth Commission, which the ANC wanted for its own members to come forward and acknowledge we did terrible things, but also all the people who'd committed violations, overwhelmingly from the state side, to come forward and acknowledge what they did. They couldn't get a blanket amnesty. But if they came forward, if they acknowledged, if they told the truth, they could get amnesty. And we felt that was much more productive, not only in terms of state resources, but it was actually more meaningful for people to acknowledge what they'd done. That's number one. And it was also a better way of reintroducing, reconnecting, knitting together the society for them to acknowledge, than just sending some to jail, others not getting to jail in a very, very arbitrary way. And our Truth Commission heard something like 20,000 people, different parts of the country, telling their stories of the pain they'd suffered. So that was acknowledged. And several hundred people from the security forces coming forward and say, we did these things. That was acknowledged. And it lifted an enormous mental burden on our country. We weren't growing up in two countries, those who'd suffered, knowing what life was like, and those who'd been responsible, denying everything. That overcoming of denial was so, so, so important for us. And it enabled us to carry on then with the other reforms the society needed. On its own, the TRC would not have been enough. There had to be movement now to enable the poor to live better lives, enable our democracy to flourish, for people to see the country was changing, and for those in government who continued to be involved in corruption and violations and so on, to be held to account. And I think the broad themes of restorative justice, it's called, not punitive justice, restorative justice, are very transportable to other countries. The format can differ very much, but central to it is acknowledgement. Just recently, the Pope of Rome was in Canada, and he acknowledged the violations of the rights of the children of indigenous people who were taken away from their families to be civilized in Catholic schools, with terrible, terrible destructions of their psyche and sense of identity and being, and he apologized. Very late, but he did it wholeheartedly, and it makes Canada a stronger country that that's happened. It's not a more shameful country, but a country where shame is not buried, but where shame is acknowledged, and somehow it becomes less bitter, and the people can get on with their lives.
Thank you. And going further to Armenia-Turkey relations, I would like to, as you may know, we have a very difficult history, and there was a genocide, and there is a denial, and also other things, and in the end of the day we are living next to each other, and we have to deal with each other. And I was wondering what will be your suggestion in this case, what to do, how to make the process happen of normalizing relations and also acknowledging and all the things which are coming out of this acknowledgement.
Well, you know what strikes me, it's been extremely moving being here and going to the museum, and there was nothing new in the facts, the overall story, but the detail was so telling and so convincing. You know, if I'm Albie a person, Albie the judge, the evidence is just massive and overwhelming. And it's also evidence in the minds and memories of people. Maybe the most important evidence of all, you know, of those who were so affected by it. There's a truth in that, even if some of the incidents get collapsed and telescoped and the dates might be wrong, that historic experience of Armenians, of Jews in the Holocaust, of Rwandans in the genocide there, in different parts of the world. It's immense and it's massive, it's unlawful, and it has to be acknowledged. But what happens if it's not being acknowledged? And for me, part of the sadness is I meet Armenians who are resilient, who are creative, You have a strong sense of beauty. It's the beauty we heard in the church. It's the beauty in so many aspects of the cultural life, of the dress, in the interpersonal relationships. There's a lot of charm here that's very, very lovely to enjoy, and the people I meet have a warmth and humanity that's tremendous. And I'm longing to see that expressed and articulated more. So if there's this blanket denial and you are involved in a blanket affirmation and you're deadlocked and everything is trapped in that deadlock, then my intuitions would be surround, get out, go around, find other ways, express the warmth, the beauty, the love, the resurgence, the way in which people who were forced to emigrate in very harsh circumstances used their intelligence and their sense of belonging and community and togetherness and their beliefs to make new lives without losing their identity as Armenians all over the world. And somehow that story, I don't find it here. I don't find it here. I'd love to see that story, not in a triumphalist kind of a way, but in a way that corresponds to the actual experiences I'm having with the people. This is a lovely city to be in, walking around in the streets and seeing the fountains and the lights and the sense of freedom of movement and happiness, actually, happiness, of mobile happiness of people, in spite of all the hardships, in spite of the recent war, in spite of the exposure of the corruption and so on. That core integrity hasn't been lost, and it'd be wonderful to see that. At the museum, I asked the director, is it visited by people from all over the world? And he said yes, and many visitors come from neighboring countries that are Muslim. And he says he sees through his window women with the scarves coming in. I wish I could see that in the museum. Somehow, on the way out of the museum, it's just a little gesture that the museum is an denunciation of an event. It's not an accusation of a people or of a religion. And without taking away anything from the tragedy of that immense human massacre and the deep wounds on people, it can create little points of connection, of hope, of friendship, of love, of human contact that for me would be part, if you like, of soft vengeance. That would make it maybe easier to begin to get more acknowledgement, to even suspend, don't forget that issue, but don't allow that issue to be the total issue. To, you know, I hear about the wonderful dye made from, I think, little snails that made Anatolia and parts of what are now Armenia very wealthy in years, centuries gone by. And now the snails are on this side and the knowledge is on this side. Or maybe it's the other way around. The knowledge is this side, the snails are that side. And both sides suffer. If that little snail could become a point of unity, a tiny little object and a beautiful color, a red color, a point of unity, it could be a symbol of peoples getting together and discovering their common humanity. The man who put the bomb in my car that cost me my arm and the sight in one eye, I met him through the Truth Commission. He was going to the Truth Commission. He wanted to meet me first. I spoke to him. It was a very strange conversation. And in the end, I said, sorry, I can't shake your hand. Normally, I shake the hand of someone when I say goodbye. But go to the Truth Commission. And he went away. Months later, I bump into him at a party, and he says, "Albie, I went to the Truth Commission, you said one day," and I shook his hand. I almost fainted. He went away beaming, but I was told afterwards he went away and he cried for 2 weeks. I hope it's true. I'm not even investigating. I'd rather believe it's true. And maybe it's not even true than investigate and discover it's not true. But he commented afterwards that when he met me and he saw my arm, he suddenly realized what he'd done, that it was to another human being, and it shook him up very, very profoundly. So acknowledgement comes from many different sources, many different ways, not necessarily from head-on conflict, in which the defenders of injustice internalize it in themselves and feel they're being beaten down if they acknowledge the terrible things they've done. Maybe there are ways of surrounding them with little bits of truth and humanity, and peoples of the different countries making the connections, getting together in ways that reach the human heart, and from the human heart spread to the human brain.
Thank you. And one last question. As you know, Armenia is independent for 30 years, and we went through lots of challenges, wars, and other problems. And I was wondering, given the fact that now youth is taking more part in building the country, and there is this situation with difficulty of transforming the country to democratic country. I was wondering what your suggestion would be, what to focus on, how to make the country truly democratic.
My experience in South Africa was that when people came to tell us what they thought we should do, it never really worked. When people came to tell us what they had done, that's useful, that we can use, that doesn't work here. So my main response to your question is I don't know. I tell you our story and see what you can choose from it. And this theme of soft vengeance, I think, is very transportable, and something like transitional justice, very transportable. The other mechanisms, I think the idea of, if there's going to be a reform of the Constitution, to have what we have in our Constitution, Chapter 9, Institutions for the Protection of Democracy. The Independent Electoral Commission is created by Parliament, very public process, choosing people after lots of public vetting, people in whom the public have confidence, for the integrity. It's not chosen by the incumbents at any particular moment, who will then try to protect themselves. We have a Judicial Service Commission, chosen, set up of representatives of the legal profession, representatives of political parties, one law teacher, some people appointed for a certain term by the president, and they are independent. And they have public investigations in relation to people who put their names forward to become judges. It's been hugely significant in our country. The public can see on television the questioning. They can understand the people appointed by that body. And some people on our top court are appointed by the president, but from a list sent to him or her by that particular body. We've got the Auditor General, who inspects all the books of all the levels of government. It's so important to have proper financial controls, public controls, a small amount for secret services, and even then they have a special inspection. I think that is something deserving special protection. We have a Commission for Gender Equality, separate from the Commission for Human Rights. Commission for Human Rights, very global, but for the very specific issues of sexism, of gender-based violence, not only sexual assaults, but the touching and the feeling and the funny names that are used, that affect women in their places of work and all over the place. All of these different things can be dealt with by that specific gender commission. We have a commission for religious and cultural rights. It played a very important role. Now we have some very strange religious people with cults, and they get the congregants to pay a lot of money, and they spray doom. That's an anti-fly, anti-mosquito spray, and they get heady, and he's taking money from them. Do you close down that church or not? Is that invading freedom of religion? We've got a body that deals with those issues. And that was a unique creation by the constitution makers in South Africa, our parliament that functioned as a constitution-making body. We called Constitutional Assembly. And I think reforms maybe can be put in place to strengthen the public control and supervision and understanding and knowledge of what these key bodies do. Particularly, I would say, we also have a public protector with very powerful authorization to inspect books, to subpoena, to get evidence, any kind of wrongdoing in the spheres of government. Now there's a big call to have an anti-corruption commission specific to corruption, and there's strong support across party. That's just something I place on offer. I'm not saying you should do it. I'm saying it's worked very well in South Africa. And we've had 5 general elections since the equivalent of our independence, democracy, 1994. They've been free and fair. People trust the elections. We've had a constitutional court that has not been afraid to hold against the presidents. I loved Nelson Mandela. I adored him. He was my leader. As a judge, Justice Albie Sachs, he passed some proclamations about a very good thing, first local government elections, on the instructions of Parliament, and we said Parliament can't give lawmaking to the President. Parliament must pass the law itself. We declared it unconstitutional. He went on television to say, I must be the first to accept the decisions of the interpretation of the Constitution made by the Constitutional Court. We ruled against President Thabo Mbeki when he was in denial against the existence of HIV, the virus. And our people were dying. And women about to give birth who could have benefited from nevirapine, cutting the transmission of the virus to their children by 50%, were clamoring, we want antiretroviral. And he was limiting it to 2 sites in each of the 9 provinces. And our constitution spoke about everyone has the right to adequate health care. And we used the constitution to compel the president now to roll out. And we now have the biggest antiretroviral program in the world. Sadly, because we have the biggest incidence of HIV. But these are all examples of how institutions created by the constitution makers can function in times of pressure to ensure that democracy prevails. And perhaps the most important of all was when the Constitutional Court ordered our president then, Jacob Zuma, to pay back to the state money that had been spent excessively on upgrading his private house. He was entitled to security from state funds, but not to a swimming pool. And that was being avoided. And Parliament was supporting him in that. And one group in Parliament went to the Constitutional Court. I was off the court then. And they said no. And the President isn't just the most senior functionary fulfilling duties of state. The President must exemplify the values of our Constitution, must be the first to show the values of our Constitution. And the Parliament must also respect the values of our Constitution. So our Constitution has a very long section at the beginning. We, the people of South Africa, it's not I, the President of South Africa, or I, the Constitution maker of South Africa. We, the people of South Africa, recognize the injustices of our past, honor those who suffered for justice and freedom in our land, respect those who have worked to build and develop our country, and believe that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, united in our diversity. We therefore, through our freely elected representatives, accept this Constitution as the supreme law of the Republic, so as to heal the divisions of the past, lay the foundations for a democratic and open society, improve the quality of life for all, build a united and democratic South Africa, able to take its rightful place as a sovereign state in the family of nations. May God protect our people, Nkosi Sikeleli Africa, Borna Baloka Sechaba Saeso, God seën Africa, South Africa. And then we have, after the preamble, foundational principles of fundamental human rights, supremacy of the Constitution and the rule of law, non-racism, non-sexism, multi-party state to create an open society. And then we have an extensive Bill of Rights. So the Constitution doesn't start with power and add, like the Americans afterwards, amendments to limit the power. The Constitution starts with values, and everybody's bound by those values. And we find in South Africa that's helpful. Parliament passing the law has to look to the preamble and the Bill of Rights, foundational principles. The judges applying the law have to look to that. The president acting the way he or she does has to be influenced by and responsive to those values. Again, that's something I feel is transportable. Institutions, precise words, very, very important. Structures, very, very important. Separation of powers, each having its own sphere and interacting, very, very important. But what binds it all together is the complex of values, defining values. And those values last beyond this parliament and that parliament, this president and that president. And for the country, the people exercising power, the people being affected by power, to embody those values and think about those values and be directed by those values, I think is enormously educative in any society.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your time.